All right, guys, welcome back to the Adam and Peter Fitness podcast. Today on the podcast, I have Natalie Richards, who is last year's IPF World 57 kilo world champion. Also, just competed at Sheffield. Did quite well there too. If you guys have been following Natalie, she's had a pretty, honestly, quick rise to the top. I'm sure it doesn't feel like that because you are more aware of than anybody else of what your training is like and the ups and downs of it. But want to thank you for coming on. Is there anything you'd like people to know about you?
Heck yeah. Thank you so much for having me on today. Really, I'm just excited to talk about powerlifting. We don't talk about it enough. So
Right.
today should be fun.
Well, cool. So I wanted to first just go off of what I mentioned earlier. So, you've been able to make really consistent progress in training. And I think that this is something that if you look at most of the top lifters, like open powerlifting, whatever, they've been able to pretty consistently add to their dot score and just continually get better. Obviously, there's ups and downs. We'll also talk about that too. But I guess I want to ask you, what are the main things that you think have contributed to your success?
Yeah. Definitely the key word there is consistent, because it is all these consistent things adding up that really make the success. And I think one is having a really, really good team around me, where I'm training, and then working with Steve from Pure's Performance has been the biggest game changer, because I feel consistency in every single block. So then by the time meet day comes, it's not like a big guess if I'm going to make every attempt or not, because I just feel that momentum we've built has been really, really crucial in holding on to gains and just getting overall stronger.
So as far as that momentum, I know that really powerlifting is all about that. It's all about developing that training momentum, and I think that one of the things that really advanced athletes do better than even the lifetime intermediates is you don't max out, you keep your actual RPE 8 at the end of the block when your coach says it. I know that Steve has said he's put some stuff on powerlifting now about your training specifically, but before you start working with Steve, what did you feel like were the main things you were struggling with?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the biggest thing was probably fatigue management. After working with Steve now, that's one thing that we addressed, and almost immediately, I not only felt healthier, I wasn't getting beat up so much, but I just felt way, way stronger with the way that we were approaching every session. I wasn't having a ton of, sets that were super high volume on my secondary days anymore, controlling that to make my primary days feel better. Just everything fatigue management, I say, was almost an immediate, yes, this is working. This feels way better. And before I started working with Steve, it was a very, very high volume program and very, I would say straight set focused. I would do for example, a 5x6 on squats, and that would just absolutely kill me. And I would have a ton of lower back soreness for days, and have some hip pinching and some common, overtraining issues, and just adjusting the overall volume that I've been doing has helped so much.
When you first you had to change that, is I think that it's a double whammy because powerlifters we're kind of masochistic with we love that pain and kind of pushing through that hard stuff, and I've done some crazy things on my training too. I remember my first powerlifting meet, I would do sort of the juggernaut training systems of block periodization approach, and my coach was also over there. I made great progress, but holy shit, I did 9x3s,
Oh my God.
and straight sets too.
Yeah.
Was there some fear of lowering down that volume and lowering down the overall intensity? Oh my gosh, this is easier, this feels wrong, because I don't know that for myself. That has been a very big theme with myself and my athletes who come to me, because and I think that that's one of the biggest things that does differentiate powerlifting coaches that are really good and ones that are okay, is that they actually know how to manage fatigue while getting progress.
That's right. Yeah. Because you don't want to pull back. You don't want to be too easy to, training throughout the year and not actually challenging yourself. When I first made the transition over, I immediately felt so much better. So I wasn't really concerned, oh, these are way too easy. I just kind of trusted the process, because it's another big thing. If you don't trust your powerlifting coach, then it's a lot harder to make those transitions. But I trusted Steve, and obviously the payout has turned out really, really good.
I think a really big theme there too is you have really, you said, trusting your coach, because if you don't trust your coach, you don't actually follow what's on that paper.
Yeah.
You're trying to always sort of force the progress. It's not how it works. Everybody gets in that, especially myself, bench press, it's just the most frustrating lift. It's oh, I gotta really push hard to get that, and then it's just it's well, you're not actually following the program towards the actual intensity, which is therefore you're not getting the actual stimulus to fatigue ratio that you want to have. So then it's you kind of start over, and sometimes with my clients, it's I'm like, are you actually hitting RPE or not? Like, and they're like, I'm
Yeah.
not. And I'm like, let's try hitting the RPE, and then
Okay.
we can like try to like see like what changes need to be made.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You got to follow the program to get the results.
So as far as like the fatigue management side of things, like how do you like we're doing deloads before? I know that in Steve's approach, he does use deloads.
Right. I'm trying to remember. If I think I did have like deload weeks, but they were like put in my program as needed. So like when I got to a point where I was literally like dying, then I would have a deload. Whereas
Yeah.
now my program usually has like a very, very pulled back week one. And that I would say is the fatigue management part of not having a true deload, because I pull back so hard in my week one. I feel great from, let's say, weeks 2 through 5. So that week one is literally like RP3 on a top set or something, RP4, and then a couple less sets of accessories. And that's pretty much all I need now without having to, one, halt momentum and do like a super hard deload or get super beat up to the point where I feel like I need one.
Right. And that's one of the things that I used to really think that deloads, like hard deloads, like are like meaningfully different pro training, were like necessary to make progress happen. But I kind of realized that in my own system, like that was a fault in my system. It was just like training too high fatigue, or my athletes were, oh my gosh, I'm dying on that week 4 or 5, and they're just, just trying to straight the way across, and it turns into like training isn't as much fun, and also just
Yeah.
like you're not going to be able to create that and maintain that momentum. I think it's also interesting that you pointed out like how low of an RPE of a week that
Yeah.
is. Because I think that like especially as you get like more advanced and you get stronger, as you're extremely strong, like over 3 times body weight squat, it's you have to really pull back more because you get so much more fatigue from those heavy weights. And then like in order for you to actually hit that RPE, that your art coach wants you on like a week one, you have to really pull back a lot of weight because you're just so fatigued. But because like that fatigue cost of that heavy week, because you're stronger, you can actually need to do that in order to actually get the adaptation from that heavy week.
Yeah, that's like super well said too. And like I remember back before I had like as big of a squat I do now, even on my deload weeks back then, it wasn't as pulled back as it is now, I'm pretty sure. Like I would still hit like some sort of high rep set, like a 5 at an RP 5. But now if I do like a single at like a 3, it's going to be way easier. So like the difference in managing that fatigue with the actual like volume itself has just been a huge game changer.
Yeah, I think too, like I've thought less about like RPE in general and more like how like the weight's supposed to feel like each week. I always say like on like a deload week
Yeah.
or like a week one's, that's how I do like sort of the weight holds structure. You want to have something feel very snappy. It shouldn't feel hard. And however light that is, it's however light it is. And then you basically look at the difference between your where that is and like your peak strength, and that's how big of jumps you have to make week to week.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely like figuring out what weekly jumps like you need as an athlete is like something you find out over time as you get into the groove and your like normal programming style and everything like that. But knowing that I make like 5 kilo jumps week to week lets me pull back on that week one because I'm like, who cares? I'm going to make a bigger jump next week and then have that same momentum for the next 4 weeks. It just kind of starts making a lot more sense when you get that data.
Mm-hmm. And so like throughout a training block, how has your approach then sort of changed with like say like pushing accessories, compound lifts, and then like weekly rate of progression like as you've gotten stronger?
Yeah, like my accessory workload, I think pretty much stays the same year round. Maybe now that I'm not competing for a couple months, I might have like 1 or 2 more accessories, but for the most part, I have the same volume accessory wise up until let's say like weeks 4 or 5. And if I'm going into a meet, that final like block leading into meet day, then that's when my accessories are pulled back. But my actual like volume, like sets of 7 or sets of, like whatever on bench press, those always stay the same. It's just like the intensity is adjusted during the like peak meet, leading into meet day phases. But accessory work, like we'll push leg press, like one set of 10, but for like RP 8 to 9 for like blocks and blocks and blocks, and have that kind of different progressive style, and then do a set of 8 for the next 3 blocks, or set of whatever on leg press or Bulgarians or something. So like the volume for the accessories is always there and always like trying to like challenge as I go out throughout the block.
Would you say that you are one of those lifters that like a large portion of that training stimulus is from that accessories, or do you think it's mostly like from the main lifts for you personally?
It depends on the lift. For something like squat, I get a decent bit of volume, but I think I benefit greatly from having things like leg press. bench press, I think I bench so much now, which is 5 times a week. I don't really need a ton of accessories. At least that's what I think. I still
I
have some upper
agree.
body accessories, but I bench so much with barbell work. I get the majority of the benefit from that. And then deadlifting, probably just as well, just more barbell work because I have 2 deadlift days a week, and one's technique, a little bit lighter, and then one's more so like the heavier singles and less rep work. So I don't know, squats, leg work, a little bit from accessories, but I feel like for the most part, I get a lot of my needed stimulus from barbell work.
Yeah, I like talking to different lifters about this because I always say most of the people at the top, like IPF worlds, whatever, like they're gonna have that more of that training response, and that's why you see a lot in the generic powerlifting programs, like why they are so compound driven, is because like people are a little more built for that, or they can tolerate that a little bit better. Whereas for a lot of people, like myself, who are not very well built for really anything besides deadlift, you have to get more creative and think a little bit outside the box and push accessories more, have that be like the larger part of the stimulus. Like for myself, like dumbbell press drives my bench more than my bench does. Because I can
Nice,
just
nice.
recover from that easier. So I think it's just interesting to hear about that and sort of how your training is sort of structured. Was there anything else like you thought that maybe would have contributed to your consistent powerlifting progress other than getting coached and fatigue management?
Definitely, I guess, like locking in normal external variables as well. That's like, one aspect with nutrition that I've really focused on as well. Because I do nutrition coaching, but I also do it for myself in the off season and for meet day performances. So just dialing in like year round, making sure that whether I'm macro tracking or prioritizing protein or focusing on just kind of like healthier like food options to make sure that my training doesn't feel like crap. Because if you eat like Taco Bell before you go into a deadlift session, you're probably not going to feel too great.
Yep.
So like focusing on, those externals, sleep, recovery, just being a smarter lifter has definitely helped as well.
As far as your nutrition goes, this is one of the things I think that most powerlifters should really take their nutrition more seriously, because the best people in powerlifting tend to be the most jacked and lean in their weight
It's true.
classes, and like that's like why you're so strong. Um, in terms of like your nutrition, like what do you think are like the main things that you focus on that make the biggest difference?
Definitely eating enough because, well, it depends on the person because some people overeat pretty easily, some people undereat pretty easily. If I make an effort to meal prep like at least 2 or 3 meals throughout the entire like day, then I'm golden. I know I'm going to hit my protein. I'm going to hit my fiber goals and things like that. So just making sure that I eat enough and setting like reasonable weight targets for what I want to be in the off season. So if I want to eat a little bit more and go up to like 59 to 60 kilos, and I have all these, heavier movements, I'm training hard, doing accessories, making sure that food kind of fuels that, for lack of a better word, and then being smart and cutting down when meet day gets closer and making sure that I'm not training too high above my competition weight.
I think that's an interesting approach actually with the whole like pushing up above your weight class in the off season, like to maybe, that 2 or 3% above. And then like once you get like closer to meet, like going down, I feel like a lot of the best lifters actually do that, where they're like, so they do most of their off season work like above their weight class and they sort of diet down. And I feel like as long as you know how to diet properly, like you can actually like that's how you're going to be maximize your progress in that weight class in the long run.
Yeah, I agree too. As long as you're, like careful with it, because sometimes you don't want to do, the opposite effect where you go up too high and then you're trying to cut literally 5 kilos or more into meet day because then your training's going to suffer like quite a bit. But if you're careful with it and you can kind of time and plan out when you want to be at a certain body weight when and come down and look at your training, then it makes, I think, a lot of sense. Because if I sat at 57 year round, I would not be a very happy camper personally.
Right. And I think it's actually interesting that you point that out because like I think there's always some sort of trade-offs that a lot of elite lifters do make to like be in their respective weight classes. And hearing that, you probably have to be really on top of your nutrition and like really on top of your steps and everything just to make sure that you can like recover better because also like when you're pushing the limits of weight class, your body becomes so much more sensitive to like
Yeah.
every little variable outside of training, including your own training. And but usually, it's like training that's the easiest part. It's everything else outside of it that gets
Yeah.
to be more and more challenging.
Yeah. That's a fair way to put it, I'd say. Yeah.
I think one thing too that you mentioned with like, I have to like meal prep. I'm assuming you're kind of naturally like an undereater. Is that
Yeah, like I would say like I would undereat something like protein, but I would overeat something like fats because it's really, really easy to eat like an entire box of Oreos. But if
Right.
I'm meal prepping, then the kind of actual like good macro ratio is a lot easier to hit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because like I think that one of the biggest things that people do wrong is they try to have two different food choices day to day. And if they
Yes.
find a pretty consistent rotation of meals that you enjoy that allow you to hit your macronutrient targets, macronutrient targets, is really important. Is like it just reduces down that. So Austin Rock, he calls it dietary RPE, which I love that term. Um, I also think that knowing what type of eater that you are, if you naturally undereat, like your boy,
Right.
if I'm going to be in a surplus, I have to plan and be intentional about it, and eat just a little bit extra than what my hunger cues might say. If you naturally are an overeater, well, you need to just be aware of that and also augment food choices to like manage hunger. Because I think that's really where like the skilled nutrition coach can really come into play with helping you navigate that. I think that like one of the biggest things I think that people can do to manage to maximize their competitiveness is just improve their body composition at their respective weight classes. And I think a lots of times powerlifters are scared to like cut because of that. Um, so I know that you did actually, you cut down into Sheffield.
I dieted down a little bit, yeah. My cut into Sheffield wasn't my favorite cut because the diet phase was a little bit wonky. But yeah, I dieted down a little bit and then did like a really quick gut cut the week of.
So what were you think are like are the biggest takeaways you've had from like the skill of training in a deficit? Because I do think it's different, and unless you know like how to navigate those waters, it can be quite hard. Like I literally have some people in my gym who are like, I'm cutting, I'm not powerlifting anymore, so I'm done with my cut. I'm like, what?
Oh my God,
Um,
it's so
yeah,
aggressive for
it's
no
very
reason.
strange. Yeah.
Oh.
So like, what would you say are the biggest things that you've learned about training in a deficit? Like, how do you retain your strength to the best way possible?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I would say like the two biggest things when I'm in a deficit is probably meal timing because I hate being hungry for a long period of time. Like if I'm hungry for more than 2 hours, like you better watch out. I'm not going to be like a happy camper. So like timing my meals to make sure I'm eating, like more frequently helps a lot during my cut. And then right before I go and train, having usually like 20 to 50 grams of carbs and just making sure I have that every single day before I go lift just is a super easy way that helps. And then additionally, trying to have larger volume of food that's like lower calorie dense. So whether that's like more salad that's just like actually physically larger, potatoes, mixing rice with veggies, making the food actually seem larger and having more time to eat, that has helped as well. Even if the calories aren't as high or if I'm not eating some, like junk food that's not really a benefit that's going to help me with my training.
Yeah, I think that too, like with that food volume, if you actually know how to manipulate it, you can actually feel pretty similar levels of fullness throughout the majority of your cut. There's always a point where just, you're just hungry no matter what.
Yeah.
But you can pretty well modulate that to where, okay, like cool, I don't really feel that different. I have a little bit less energy, but like as far as like food goes, like I'm good.
Yeah. If you can figure out like a consistent, like you mentioned, if you eat similar things every single day and can figure out that kind of volume, that makes you feel a little bit fuller, whether that's having more fiber or just larger portion sizes, whatever it may be, then it'll probably help almost right off the bat.
I also like how you said like not letting yourself get too hungry. Like that's one of the reasons like why I personally like, don't do like intermittent fasting because like I will just get really angry and then I'll just
Yeah.
be like, I don't like anything. And then like I'm more actually prone to overeat because like my like but I've already exercised all that willpower, like not
Yes.
eating. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, it's time to eat. I'm like, I don't care. I'm gonna eat whatever I want. And then I
Yeah.
just
That's
feel
literally the
sad and
mindset.
bloated. Yeah.
Yeah. And then afterwards, you're like, oh, yeah,
You're
I
like, I should
understand.
have ate earlier. That was dumb. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like a meme going around with I can't stop overeating at night. Be honest, I don't eat anything all day. I'm like, yep,
Yeah.
that same.
That's why you're eating. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's very accurate.
So I know that. So obviously we just talked about your consistent progress, but you also had a pretty significant setback at nationals, which is like one of the biggest meets, where you bombed out with squats. How do you deal with that? Like come back with that, like because I think that every powerlifter is going to have a meet that's not good. I mean that underperforms even though you did your absolute best in competition. How did you deal with that? And sort of like yeah, I guess how do you deal with that? That's the only way I know how to say it.
Yeah. So that was, what year was that? 2023 Nationals in Vegas, USAPL, I think.
I don't even
That
remember, but I
was
just know that you bummed out.
yeah, so I bombed out on deadlifts, which is kind of sucked because that was like my favorite lift. But honestly, like going into that meet and bombing out, it sucked because it does, you want to do your best. You have more hype around you. It's a big meet throughout the year. That's honestly like the best thing that could have happened because I wouldn't have addressed the weaknesses in my training without that incident. So like if you're finding yourself in a similar situation where you've bombed out from a meet, try to find out like what happened. Was it a technique thing? Did you overestimate how heavy your opener could be? Or like what went wrong? And figuring out what went wrong and adjusting for next meet will make not only your mentality feel stronger, because that's what happened to me, where I feel way more confident now because I've addressed all those issues, and then allow you to kind of just like bounce back and get your momentum back so you can have more fun in meets going forward. So like right after that bomb out, I switched coaches, or no, I competed again to get a number on the board for that year to make sure that I could still be in the rankings. Then I switched coaches, switched federations, and then just started going 2023 and onwards. And it's been really, really good ever since.
I love how basically what you said about like that's basically in a nutshell. Like reframing the situation. You're like, okay, like this is what it is. That this sucks.
Yeah.
But you know, like what can I do better to make sure this doesn't happen again? And I think that also like power there's always like a recency bias. So like I think that was a good idea for like you to just compete as soon as possible. Yeah, that bad taste out of your mouth. Like, oh, I am still a good power lifter. But it's just, you know, it's like, oh well, was my depth high on squat? Okay, well I gotta, you know, do that better, or you know, it's not pausing my benches long enough, or you know, did I just have a bad attempt selection in general? Do I need to just open up lighter? Because I think that's a really like I think that's one of the things for like myself, like attempt selection on meet day is kind of everything. Especially you know
Yeah.
you could be at these high levels, but just like looking back and saying like instead of like getting down on yourself and like oh I'm not cut out for this sport, just understand it's a part of it. Like I've missed. You know, I'm a dead deadlifter too, and so like if I miss like my third deadlift, it's like my total doesn't look very good.
Yeah.
um, and it's just like, you know, for me, it's just been like really learning about better, like, okay, like be honest with yourself about what you have on meet day. It doesn't matter like what you think you should have, because it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like it's like how strong am I on that day? Take what's there on that day, and you're only competing so often. So like make as many points as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like realistic attempt selection, whether it's you coaching yourself or your handler or whoever's doing it, but like the platform does not usually magically add like 20 kilos. And I feel like some people think that they can like hit like 10 or 20 kilos above what they've done in training. And realistically, for like 99% of people, it's probably not going to happen. Like you just have to kind of be smart with what you choose.
Right. You just had a post about that today. I saw. And one of the things I think about like peaking is that it's really changed a lot, especially in the past like couple of years with how people prefer to peak. I would totally agree with you. Or like you're probably not getting a super peak. It's probably going to be around what you hit in training, especially if you're cutting. Like that's the best you're going to really hope
Yeah.
for. Um, I guess like as far as like peaking goes, how have things changed for you with peaking, because your competition results have gone better and better and better, and that's obviously a huge part of it.
Yeah. So like every time like me and Steve do a meet, like he'll change or tweak something just ever so slightly. And I think that every single time we've done a meet, it's just tweaked and tweaked and tweaked. Now it feels really, really good. Like Sheffield, I think was our third meet together. And that was probably like the best every single lift has peaked. So it kind of is similar where I'm hitting my heaviest lifts, I would say like 6 or so weeks out, maybe 5 weeks out. I'd have to look at my program. I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 5 or 6 weeks out, and then I'll, go back and ramp back up into meet day, and I'll have like a heavier single earlier in the week, and then I'll have the heaviest single on the platform on meet day for like squats, for example, or I'll bench press and do the same normal Larson bench press the week of the day before and go on and hit the platform. It is making sure that my training matches what I'm leading into for meet day, pretty much for the most part. And the only difference I'd say for Sheffield is that we tapered deadlift a little bit further out than last time. I think that was one thing that he changed, and deadlifts felt really, really good on the day.
So what I'm hearing is you actually hit your heaviest, like let's like say like an RPE 9 in that like second to last block, and then going into that block, you're just slowly building in two things with like like sort of just like a ramping intensity approach, like, lining up your peak week with the meet. Is that right?
I would say so, but I know I hit like heavier bench presses more often than like squat or
Yeah.
deadlift. But
Well,
I
the
think for the most part,
bench is
yeah,
different. I think that makes sense too, because like of how strong your squat and your deadlift are. Like, especially if you're trying to do, I think what the bit I'm hearing with Steve did is like he probably was like, okay, cool, like let's sort of like, I can't have Natalie hit a really heavy squat and deadlift like at the same time. And
yeah,
like she needs to, you're getting that much stronger, and the cheaper just needs to start like further out with like intensity, but like, I can know about where she is if I have a heavy squat like that second to last block, and I can just taper your deadlift down a little bit earlier because your squat still drives the majority of that progress. It's probably like what he realized with
yeah,
you. And I found
yeah,
that to be
and
really normal with like sumo deadlifters, especially with conventional deadlifters,
yeah.
it's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's true. Conventional deadlift a little bit different. And one thing on squats too is that like my arms and my wrists get super beat up. Like if I like had my heaviest squat single, like the next day I could barely like bench press like like 90 kilos. Like it just felt horrible. So like that's another element that he's kind of factored in as well, is how beat up do I get from squats to where it affects my bench press. And like the final heavy week of bench press, I think I like 1 week out from meet day, I missed every single lift because I was just beat up and having a bad day. But
Yeah.
then the taper was fine, and then meet day I hit a PR. So
Yeah, I bet like also like compared to like the actual training trends, like that was like weird, like a really
yeah,
weird week
it
too.
was super weird. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like I've had so many like preps from like, oh, like I like failed like my benches, or like I'm like 3 weeks out and like I failed like my RPE 7 squat single, and I'm like, it's so over, I'm pulling out of the meet. But then you just have to like
No.
address like, why is this, like, do I feel like shit? Did I not get any sleep? Like, how's my water, how's my hydrate, like my food intake? And it's like most of the time, and this is what I think a really big thing to also like mostly athletes do, is like you just are nerds and you just track everything. So you can look back at your data, like say, okay, training was, oh, this was what changed, or in my external variables, like this is what happened with like, oh, I got like 20K steps and I'm not used to that. Or I got in a fight with my friend the night, like
Yeah.
right before I started squatting. And like there's all these different variables. I think the more you can be aware of that, and like were you describe yourself as like a pretty like meticulous person with all this stuff?
I would say I keep a handle on things. I don't know. I wouldn't call myself maybe meticulous, but I keep a handle on, okay, how do I feel going into this session? Anything external to be aware of? Yes, no. And then I mark it and move on.
Sounds like you're I guess a better way to say it is like you're actually aware of like what your body is doing and like how it feels, and you take
Yeah.
that into consideration. And I think that's also like why Steve's been able to really help your training, is because you're aware of that. Because like your coach is really only as good as your communication. um so yeah, that's something that's just super important.
Yeah, that's super true. Like if you know that you are like at a desk job all day, not walking at all, and you tell your coach that you have stiff hips, but don't tell them that you have a desk job and you aren't walking at all, then they're going to be like, what the heck's going on here? Like having that context and that, background information is like super, super helpful.
Yeah, Kelly Mann, like on a podcast I did with her, she was like talking about how it's like super good just for walking, because it's like, in powerlifting, like we are so like, sagittal, and like we just sit down. It's like the only sort of like rotational like stimulus we kind of get in is that walking. And that's just going to be really helpful with overall like recovery in general. And a good rule of thumb is like more is better until you get tired from it and
Yeah.
you feel sore.
Oh, I agree. Like I think it was November/December, I started having this like weird quad pain, and I had just started like cutting, and I was like, what the heck's going on? Like, why are my quads so beat up from these squat sessions? And I wasn't walking like as much as I usually had. And then the second I started walking and moving more, it almost went away immediately after dealing with it for like a month. So walking's so important.
Right. Like it's just, it's like the lowest impact form of exercise,
Yeah.
and probably like the most important form of exercise that you can possibly do in general. It's
Yeah.
like I think like the research is like Americans get like 5,000 or less steps per day.
Ooh,
And like if you can get like 10K, like it's not that much. Like you just go on some walks throughout your
just
day and
moving.
not
Yeah.
sedentary all the time. Like, I mean, I personally like it. You just feel
Yeah.
so much better.
Oh, I agree. And it's going to be summer and springtime soon. So then you can actually go outside.
Oh
It'll be
yeah,
nice.
dude. In winter, I'm like,
Mm.
yeah,
Not so much. Yeah. Steps in winter is
yeah.
a little bit harder.
It's a little harder, but if you get like a walking pad, it's a lot easier. Um,
That's true.
so I guess in regards to like technique, How are you using it? You're obviously a powerlifting coach too, and this is one of the things I like talking about with online coaches. I think everybody has a good has a different system of how they teach technique. You know, if you have a client who comes to you and you see something off with their center of mass on like any of the other lifts, like how do you prefer to like coach technique in that sense? It's so much easier in person. I think that online it becomes to be pretty challenging.
Yeah, I think it's like a different challenge because people respond differently. Some people respond really well if you give them a cue that's just like literally visual, whether it's looking somewhere with your head position, if you're, doing something weird with your rib cage on squats, whether it's that or like physically pushing like your feet into the ground, like using big toe, whatever like visual like cue or what something that people can feel, like that is really like kind of a different way to approach it because you're not in person. You can't say, hey, this is literally what you're doing here, I'm going to show you like this. So that's something I've tried to do more, and just having also like kind of self-limiting variations. So for example, the center of mass issue in a squat, start doing pause squats. That's going to change people's technique without them even having to think about something else. Or like a tempo bench press to kind of cue better leg drive and control. Like just finding like kind of self-limiting variations has helped a ton with, I think, being able to help people's technique without being in person and actually physically like saying, hey, this is what's going on.
I think it's super important that you said that. Like some people they do respond really well to that cueing and like those feeling cues. Other people they just don't at
Don't,
all.
yeah,
And you have
it's
to
not
find
at
like
all.
variations that are going to like help reinforce that. You know, whether
Yeah.
that's and usually it's like center mass or something else like that. But like I think like the best powerlifters tend to be quite athletic and like they are pretty good at implementing cues. I do have some lifters who like it's like by biting tooth and nail to like get them to just like understand what their bodies are doing. And those people just about like, in my opinion, like those people get really frustrated too. I'm not saying like, hey, like, look, it's okay. This is taking time. Like, what are you feeling? What's like most frustrating is like taking like the stress off of them. And that sense of saying like, look, you're doing your best. Are you having
Yeah.
fun? Like that's what matters the most. I also think like one of the biggest things is like I hear all these like misconceptions with cueing of like there still is like the whole like sit back in the squat, and then like one of the things I don't like on deadlift is like people always try to like feel their quads. And I'm like that's not that's I don't feel like you should
I
do
haven't
that.
heard feel your quads in a long time. I forgot that exists.
I've heard a lot of my athletes like say like I can't feel my quads enough. I'm like so.
Oh,
um I think it's
I
like
think
having like actual like proper like expectations around like what a lift is like supposed to be and like how to actually move, especially as like a raw powerlifter, is important.
yeah, like I think what you said earlier about people who have an athletic background kind of have a leg up as well when it comes to learning powerlifting technique. Because for example, if you take the average like gym goer, commercial gym goer, and ask them to do like a hinge, like a hip hinge, they're gonna have no idea like how to do a hip hinge. If you ask like an athlete and give them maybe like one cue, they'll probably pick it up like really, really fast. So cueing is different for each person. You just have to find like what type of thing that works each time.
Yeah, I think that also with like variations in training, like one of the biggest things with that, like besides like obviously the technique things, I think it's probably like number one. For me has actually been like sometimes having more variation really increases like the volume I can tolerate on a certain lift.
Yeah.
Like I can't do twice a week deadlifting like both conventional. I have one day conventional, one day sumo, and that way it supports my back, and I feel like a little bit more fresh on my squats and whatever. And like so sometimes like but there's also sometimes when you just have to have the variation in to just reinforce that proper technique. Like with sumo deadlifting, very common to see pause deadlifts and all the time, just because like it's more sensitive to that technique. I also think like with more of like the technical benches, like the bigger arches, wider grip, like they tend to also need to have a little more variations, whereas like more muscularly focused people, like they're not as technically like reliant. I think that they
Yeah.
typically respond better to like I guess like in general like a little bit less variation for that purpose of like technique reinforcement, and just more
Yeah.
so like okay, how do we actually get in the most amount of volume with with different variations to actually drive progress.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree too. Cause like if you're super technically like dependent on a certain lift, then you need to practice it way more than if you're someone who does like a pretty close grip bench press, like a lot of tries, a lot of chests, accessories can do that a little bit more than just doing straight barbell benching.
Yeah, and I think that's also like why it's so important to have like a good like background, like several different types of lifters too, because
Mhm.
you're gonna understand like everybody responds to like everything so much differently. Like one of my clients, like his squat was not making progress forever, and then like I was like, let's do the exact opposite of what I think it's going to work, and I put it's like a ball and deadlift before his primary squat day, like the day before, and he feels strongest like that, and I'm
That's
like, don't
awesome.
know
That's like,
why,
it doesn't matter why. And if it's working, then they just keep going with what's working.
right? And I think that's also like why as a coach, like Sean Origa and I talk about this, but he's like, if you aren't able to get an athlete progress, it means that your tool belt as a coach is not wide enough. You don't know like what to do, and you're not willing to like experiment. Um,
Mhm.
and that's why experience is like the most important thing. I think I also like so many like there's like world champion like yourself. Like there's so many like psychology things with like competing and training, and then like and whatever that are just super intangible that like somebody like Steve isn't going to understand. Steve's an absolutely phenomenal coach. He's not really going to understand like that mental aspect of training, and how you deal with like those ups and downs, how you approach training sessions in a way that you can actually communicate to your athletes. So I think that's really with like every single coach, like everybody one and then has like different, like really, really good spots of them, and other people have
Yeah.
really big blind spots. Like I think Steve was excellent with like programming and technique, but probably it's just with like competition mindset and whatever, probably not as big of a strong suit. Whereas for like myself, I think that I'm a little bit better at like technique and like mindset. And but I think there's like some things with like my programming that needs some work with in terms of like some aspects of like um, you know, especially like when I see something that doesn't work like the first time, like how to change out. It's gotten better over time, but I think it's just important
Yeah.
to understand that. And I think it's also why it's important to have like a coaching community or people that you kind of like can rely on that have like are better at that than you.
Yeah, that's like a huge point too, because like you're not going to have all the tools in your toolbox, especially like if you're a newer coach too. Like you're probably going to have like one or two tools, and then as you grow and hopefully communicate and network with people in your community, whether that's talking to different coaches or talking to different types of athletes and seeing what's worked for them, and adding that kind of knowledge into your toolbox over time can make like a really, really great coach. And I think that's what we're seeing more of now, where it's not as traditional like programs like all year round. It's not same traditional where you're having traditional deloads and things like that. There's more, I feel like, variation now with how we approach powerlifting coaching.
Yeah, and I think that's also why people are getting stronger. Is
Yeah.
because we have that we just have so many more better people in the sport that are coming. I think it's also like really exciting. Seeing all the new people get in. So I guess like one question with there is if you had a beginner powerlifter, like what would you say like they really want to maximize their development. They want to be see if they can get to worlds. Like what are the biggest things that maybe you would have told yourself in the past you need to focus on these things. These are what actually matter.
Yeah.
This is what doesn't matter.
Yes. I remember back in the days training at my local YMCA, thinking about that. Like, I mean, there's really only so much you can control when you first start powerlifting, and that's going to be consistent training as like the number one thing, like, and then following a program, and then probably third, just trusting the process. Because if you are maxing out every other month, which you probably are if you are a new powerlifter without a coach, then you're probably going to end up injuring yourself and setting yourself back a bit. If you aren't consistently training, then you're going to wonder why you're not getting stronger. That's why you have to build your training block and your techniques as well, because you're not going to have great technique when you first start out. And it's going to be a process, because when I was training, I was like, oh man, if I just do this one thing on squats, I'll have perfect technique. And I'm like, how many years in now? And I'm like, okay, if I just focus on this on today, just continue thinking about good technique with every session. And that's kind of like a long-term thing. It's not like you're going to have great technique after two tries.
I also think like the technique, you understand that it's going to feel kind of different every session because you're a different lifter every single session. Um, that's really important to just understand. Some days are going to feel good, some days are not. Um,
Yeah.
and hopefully as long as you're able to make progress with that technique and you're not getting hurt. I think that's what I sort of like went to like the like coaching technique is like touching it less if somebody like feels strong with it. So it's
Mhm.
like something like very obvious in terms of like competition results. But yeah, I think as far as with beginner powerlifters, like I think getting direction as soon as possible is like the best thing because like you're going to learn how to train, do all these things in general, and save yourself a lot of like of that grief of like wondering like what if I had a coach, like what if I
Yeah.
maximize things like first off. I think that it's worked out well for you, but I think that, the better situation you can set yourself up in, you're better you're going to be.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it depends on like if your goals are to compete and, hit whether you want to be a state champ, national champ, world champ, then yes, go ahead and grab like a powerlifting, like do your research, find a powerlifting coach, or at least start learning the basics of powerlifting. Like I ran the free Candido program when I first started, and that was like my introduction before getting a coach. But if you have these goals and you really want to hit them, then it will make life a lot easier if you have some guidance along the way.
I think like one thing to too is like look at the best athletes in the world. They have coaches. It doesn't matter like what sport. And like
Yeah.
I have like 3 coaches, and I spend a lot of money on this stuff because I just want to get the most out of it. And
Yeah.
the reality is that if you really want to get, I'm sure you spent like most of a lot of time and energy and money on this stuff too, and that's just what it takes.
Yeah. Yep. That's what it takes. Whatever like type of dedication or whatever realistic goals you want to set for yourself, expect to either spend a little bit more money or spend a little bit more time doing them.
Right. Well, cool. I guess like one last question to end things off. What is your favorite energy drink?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so original OG favorite energy drink is the White Monster. Recently, I've been very impressed by the Alani News. I don't know, do you drink those at all?
I
They
never
have,
tried them, but I
oh
have one of
gosh.
my last few people who drink them in my gym all the time.
Oh, they're so
I'm a
good.
ghost addict.
Oh my gosh, those are good too. I think the Alani News though, maybe my new favorite in the like I think it's grape, but it's called like Stardust flavor,
Oh, they
but
have a
they're
grape
really, really
one?
good.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So like I have
Yeah.
this very like I remember when I was a kid, like at Costco, they had like this grape soda. And like that was good. I didn't like scream at other people or like run around like a chick on the head could cut off. I could get like a grape soda. So that would be I have this that's pretty nostalgic for me.
Yeah, you need to get one then. I'm pretty sure it's like called Stardust or something along those lines, but
Stardust.
they're really good. Yeah, I like them a lot.
Yeah, I definitely I think you're either an energy drink person or a coffee person. I'm definitely an energy drink person. I like the bubbles.
Oh yeah, I do too. I like usually if we'll do like pre-workout like my 110%, but if I don't, then I have a white monster or an Alani Nu as backup. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember like Christian Guzman with like the White Monsters. He got me hooked back in college
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's good for your heart. Drinking
for
like 2 or
sure.
3 of those. Yeah.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for coming on, Natalie. If people
Yes.
want to hire you for coaching or follow you along, where they head?
Yeah, they can check out Nat_lifting or objective_SP on Instagram. Shoot me a message there or an email is linked in my bio as well. But yeah.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I include all those things in the show notes. And thank you for coming on, and thank you to all listeners for listening. I'll talk to you guys in the next episode.